Well, good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. For 250 years, the United States has been the most prosperous and enduring experiment in self-government that the world has ever known. Our nation's founders understood that freedom and human flourishing, they don't come from concentrating power in government. They come from protecting individual liberty and encouraging personal responsibility. Those principles, they helped build the strongest economy in history and made America a beacon of hope for people around the world. But today, those foundational ideas are facing a growing challenge. The Democratic Socialists of America has released a sweeping new platform that doesn't simply call for a different public policy, it calls for fundamentally restructuring the American system of government. Among its proposals are replacing the presidency with a parliamentary-style executive chosen by Congress, making the Supreme Court subordinate to lawmakers, and abolishing the Electoral College. Perhaps even more concerning is that these ideas are no longer confined to the political fringe. Democratic Socialist candidates, well, they continue gaining influence in America's largest cities, including New York under Mayor Zohran Mamdani. Recent polling shows socialism is becoming increasingly attractive to younger Americans, with many expressing support for greater governmental control over health care, energy, housing, and other major sectors of the economy. These ideas are also finding fertile ground on many college campuses, where capitalism is often portrayed as the problem. Well, that raises some important questions. How did ideas that history has repeatedly shown to diminish freedom become attractive to a new generation of Americans? What happens when a generation loses confidence in the Constitution, private enterprise, and the values that have sustained this nation for nearly 250 years? Socialism is clearly rising in America. There's around 120,000 Americans officially who claim membership in the Democratic Socialists of America. It's the largest socialist organization in U.S. history. I suppose this shouldn't come as a complete surprise. There have been some foreshadowing of this. In the last two presidential election cycles, Bernie Sanders would have probably won the Democratic nomination if it had not been for manipulation within his own party. I think that what we're watching now is that the trend is moving to a whole new level. The DSA now has the boldness to reveal their platform in public, including talking about abolishing the Supreme Court and the executive branch as we know it. And according to their platform, capitalism is a system designed by the owning class to exploit the rest of us for their own profit. This is no longer a fringe ideology. It's gaining mainstream acceptance, even among younger Americans. Socialism is increasingly being presented as compassionate, inclusive, and morally superior. According to a recent poll conducted by the Heartland Institute, more than half of likely young voters want a socialist to win the White House in 2028. And noteworthy is that 27% of those young people voted for President Trump in the last election. 76% of young voters in the same survey agreed that major industries like healthcare, energy, big tech, they should be nationalized to give equity to the people. When 3 out of 4 young Americans believe the government should control major industries, we're witnessing more than a political trend. We're watching a fundamental rejection of the principles that built America's economic prosperity. New York City's Democratic Socialist Mayor Zohran Mamdani, he recently unveiled his plan to strip properties from landlords that he deemed bad. Mamdani told a cheering crowd of leftists that when necessary, we will take aggressive legal action to remove owners and transfer ownership to nonprofits or tenants. His promise to seize the properties of landlords that he deems unworthy should concern every New Yorker and every citizen in cities where socialism is celebrated. Yet 52% of young voters have a favorable view of Mamdani, and they like his policies even more. 62% said they support expanding his proposals for more government housing and rent freezes nationwide. 58% of voters under 40 support expanding Mamdani's plan for government-owned grocery stores to every town in America. History shows that socialist movements are rarely about helping the poor. They are always about seizing power. Marxist economic policies have repeatedly produced decline, dependency, and government control. Misery and tyranny, they follow soon behind. while we hear these platitudes they're presenting that you won't have to pay any bills and you won't have to work as hard, just remember, it simply doesn't work. This question has been asked and answered clearly throughout history. I think the other thing we have to remember as Christ followers is that politics is downstream of our faith, and the political process is a reflection of the heart of our nation. For the DSA to be flourishing in the public square, the unmistakable message that's being communicated is that our spiritual health, it's not good. We are on spiritual life support at the moment. We must take Jesus back into the public square, back into the schools, back into our universities. This isn't primarily a political battle, it's a spiritual struggle. And the church, we better wake up. We've got to have more boldness. It starts at our kitchen table, then into our neighborhoods, our workplace, and our communities. If we will do that, we will see positive change in politics. Well, in a moment, we'll talk with the Dean of Pepperdine School of Public Policy, Pete Peterson. I'll be right back.
This year, we celebrate 250 years of God's faithfulness to our nation. From backyard picnics and ball games to laughter shared with family and friends, we've been given so many blessings to enjoy together. And in a world that feels increasingly divided, these moments remind us of what matters most: faith, freedom, family, and community. Alan Jackson Ministries wants to help you carry that message with you wherever you may go. This outdoor blanket and canvas tote bag are simple reminders of God's goodness and a way to spark meaningful conversations about faith and the hope we have in Him. Request your limited edition tote bag and outdoor blanket today with your gift of $100 or more at alanjackson.com or call 800-880-5102.
Well, tonight we're joined by Pete Peterson. He's the Dean of the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine University. Welcome to the show, Pete.
Great to be back with you, Alan.
The rise of Democratic Socialist candidates seems to be gaining traction following the election of New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani. Their platform's getting headlines of late. You're someone who leads on educating in public policy. What are your thoughts on how we arrived at this place?
Well, it's worth noting, Alan, we're about to host our own mayoral election here in Los Angeles this November, and we have a Democratic Socialist as one of the two final candidates. So I think it's very likely that we could have Democratic Socialist candidates leading America's two largest cities by this November. What's causing it, though, I would say, even though we're two different cities, is somewhat similar. We're seeing definitely a growth in the power of the youth vote. These are 20-somethings and 30-somethings, by and large, that have gone through an academic education that has taught them that socialism is actually a good thing. And certainly when you see public opinion polls, socialism is viewed favorably by younger Americans, particularly younger American voters. At the same time, what we saw in New York, and I think we're going to see here in Los Angeles, is low voter turnout in these elections. So you could be looking at 30% of registered voters determining who is going to be the mayor. And in that, these concentrated, active Democratic Socialist voters and party organizations are having an outsized impact on election results. And like I said, what happened in New York could easily happen here in a few months.
Well, you know, as you said, it seems to be being led by the younger generation. I saw a poll that said more than half of likely voters, 18 to 39, want a socialist in the White House in 2028. Do you think the younger voters even understand what socialism, communism really means?
You know, Alan, I think there used to be a myth that drafts off of that old advertising campaign for Las Vegas, where they used to say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I think many Americans used to think that what happens on the college campus stayed on the college campus, that once 20-somethings got into starting their own families and paying their own taxes and doing things that adults do, that some of those perspectives on socialism and left-wing politics would recede. But I think what we're witnessing is actually the opposite happening, that we're seeing, by and large, highly educated young voters that have been schooled in a positive view of these systems like socialism are growing into 20 and 30-something voters who are supporting this. Now, I would say that I think the one thing that conservatives, and I'm a conservative, we often, I don't think, fully understand, is that the young voter doesn't necessarily see socialism just as an economic system. They see it, and you see this in some of the polling, as a system of caring, that somehow the socialist system is more caring than a so-called capitalist or free market system. And that's where, for those of us who care about the future of our country, really need to understand, just by comparing capitalism to socialism will not win political arguments. It's got to be about addressing, frankly, the cruelty that has evidenced itself through socialism that we've seen time and time again throughout world history.
Well, I think your point is well taken. You know, when the Berlin Wall came down, you didn't see the rush of people wasn't into East Germany. Right. It wasn't East German values that proliferated. It was the caring and compassion that had come from the capitalist side of the wall. Right. So is it a fail on our educational system or in the media? I mean, this question's been asked and answered in history.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, those in our generation who came up with the fall of the Berlin Wall, who understood fully the evil nature of the communist regime and system, you know, for these kids, this is, you know, ancient history, and we are not being supported in the carrying over of this history by our education system. You are not seeing classes looking deeply into the failures of communism and socialism, and quite the contrary, even in our economics departments, you're seeing support for massive welfare state bureaucracies and systems that would be akin to socialist systems. But again, I would just caution the viewers here to understand that for the younger voters, they don't see socialism purely as an economic system based on freedom. They see it as a cultural system based on what they perceive to be more caring.
Well, Secretary Rubio had some rather pointed opinions around communism. Listen to what he had to say.
The world it envisions for all of us is small, flat, gray, leveled of all exception, drained of all that is good and noble in the human soul. The world it envisions is a world without courage, a world without creativity or ambition, a world without heroes or glory or great causes to strive towards, a world without miracles, without myths, without men who rise above the rest to do incredible and extraordinary things. And the world communism envisions is a world without God.
You know, when I listen to that, it's a bit personal to me. For communism, as it was expressed for the last 100 years, has been highly oppressive of Christianity.
Yes.
And again, it's hard to wrap that as something that's compassionate, but I hear you saying we've got to reframe this conversation.
Well, and I love that clip, Alan. You've pulled the perfect one, because what Secretary Rubio is speaking in, he's speaking in moral terms. This isn't simply about getting cheaper things. This is about an entire culture that is based on oppression and the squelching of the human spirit. And certainly part of that human spirit is our divine nature. And there has not been a socialist, much less communist system that has allowed for any other God other than the state. And in that, I think Secretary Rubio is really one of the most powerful. He obviously has that connection through family to Cuba itself, and he understands that story very personally. But he also, I think, is really one of our greatest voices in confronting this growing socialism we're seeing in the country.
Pete, we need to take a short break. Stay with us for another segment. If you happen to have your phone nearby, try logging on to ajnow.com. Send us an email. We would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I'll be right back. I've learned as a pastor there's a tremendous difference in a crowd and a community of faith. When people decide to step out of the crowd and invest their time and their resources, they become a part of a community and it changes their lives. Well, I want to give you that invitation. I'm grateful you're a part of the crowd who watch the ministry. I want to ask you to consider becoming a monthly ministry partner. I believe if you'll make that regular commitment to what God is doing through this ministry, it'll bring momentum to your spiritual life and it will help us reach more people than we've ever reached with the gospel before. America is turning 250 years old. That's something that should unify us. We have so much to celebrate. There is no place like America. Our freedoms and liberties, they are unmatched in this world. Everything that's good about America, our laws, our opportunities, the prosperity we've enjoyed, well, they've come to us because of our faith. We've created a series of emails celebrating 250 years of our country. Find out how Christianity has played a role in this nation from its founding until now. You'll receive a new email each week throughout the series. Each one is designed to help you see our blessings and our heritage in a new way, how faith has played a powerful role all the way through. It's one way we're celebrating America's 250th. We hope you'll join us. You can sign up now at alanjackson.com/250. We're back now with the Dean of the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine University, Pete Peterson. In a recent primetime address, President Trump revealed that there were election integrity concerns per intelligence reports. And it said that China may have stolen as many as 220 million Americans' voter registration data. And yet, in kind of an unprecedented move, major networks didn't even want to carry the presentation or the speech. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I think it's really disappointing to see the lack of media coverage for what is a massive national security challenge. We've seen this here in California. The validity of the legitimacy of our voter rolls on a county by county basis varies widely. In fact, just here in Los Angeles County, we had it discovered that there were well over 100,000 voters on our voter rolls that shouldn't be there, whether they've moved or passed away or whatever the situation might be. And it took a lawsuit to bring the county registrar to a place where this cleaning of our voter rolls has happened. Now, for some of these states that have automatic vote by mail, as California does, it's doubly complicated because these voter rolls are essentially mailing lists for ballots. And so we're seeing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of ballots going out to invalid voters. And what could come of those votes is really not completely known. We're seeing this recently even with New Jersey and really the condition of their voter rolls and what they've allowed to have happen with those in the country illegally registering to vote, or certainly not American citizens on their voter rolls. So this voter roll issue is a serious national issue.
Well, you mentioned earlier your mayoral election in LA. Last time we talked, Spencer Pratt was still in the mix and they were still finding votes to count in Los Angeles. He didn't make the cut. He's out of that election. But since then, he has started the War Foundation, where he said he plans to continue fighting against political corruption and advocate for transparency. Do you think he's still going to have an impact in California politics?
I do. You know, Alan, as we talked about last time, it wasn't just the success of this outsider candidate. Ultimately, he was not successful in getting into the general election. But to come from where he did to where he arrived at was demonstrative of a new way of campaigning, one that not only was what you were putting out there as far as political arguments in social media, but what people around you were doing. It was a real populist. It wasn't just a populist message, it was a populist campaign strategy. And in that, he has built a lot of goodwill with a number of Californians from across political parties. And so I think he's going to continue to be a force in Los Angeles, if not California politics, for years to come. He's built himself quite a platform.
Well, in your state's gubernatorial race, you have Republican Steve Hilton, and he's running against the Democrat Xavier Becerra. Current polling has Becerra ahead by a significant margin. What are your thoughts on those possible outcomes?
Well, I must disclose that I'm a policy advisor to the Hilton campaign. I know and like Steve very much. The polling data that you just cited is real, and obviously it's based on name recognition and political affiliation. We're still in a state where Democrats outnumber Republicans by a good 20% of the electorate. And frankly, most of the so-called no party preference voters tend to lean left. So on a statewide basis, Republicans continue to face a major challenge. That being said, in this race, you have an interesting political matchup between a very good communicator in Steve Hilton and a terrible communicator in Xavier Becerra. So if Hilton is able to get him on the debate stage and do it at least 2 or 3 times in these next couple months, you could see a serious, you could see a flub, a misstep taken by Becerra that could close those numbers significantly.
Wow. Well, this week, the Trump administration paused more than $1 billion in Medicaid funds for both Minnesota and California because of fraud concerns. The governors of both states, they can continue the funding if they'll just provide some basic documentation that the services are legitimate. Gavin Newsom pretty typically accused Trump of targeting them for political reasons. He seems to have a problem taking responsibility. What are your thoughts as a California resident?
Well, what's been reported really just in the last few months is deeply shocking. As a Californian and a California taxpayer, much less an American taxpayer, the fraud that appears to be happening, and one of the real locus points is right here in Los Angeles, where you're seeing a number of so-called healthcare facilities with people who shouldn't be receiving treatment or aren't receiving treatment, but nonetheless, the facilities are being paid out of Medicare and Medicaid dollars. This fraud needs to end, and you're absolutely right about our governor's unwillingness to accept responsibility for what is a serious problem. We need to look out for the American taxpayer, and thus far, only this Trump administration appears to be doing so.
Well, Pete, given the unfolding events we're watching, I'm very grateful for your work in helping young people understand public policy. Don't grow weary, it's important.
Thanks so much, Alan. It's great to be with you, and believe me, I'm blessed to do what I do.
We will be back in just a moment. I want to give you a personal invitation to join my podcast, Culture and Christianity.
You don't compromise the truth, but you say it where the people know that you care about them.
We're trying to understand how to take our faith outside the walls of the church and live it out in the marketplace.
I just never understood the double standard because they punished me while my peers were allowed to talk about how devastated they were that Roe versus Wade was overturned.
I brought in some friends, people that are trying to do this on a regular basis.
They're never going to stop me because the truth is the truth. I'd rather be on God's side than to be a coward.
You know, we've been living in a season of unprecedented deception, propaganda, manipulation.
Our best option was to run. We were timing ourselves. I was trying to think, how can I protect my kids?
Well, I want to be a part of seeing culture and Christianity intersect. I hope you'll join the podcast soon. Thank you for taking the time to send your emails. Your thoughts and opinions are always valuable. KT from Georgia said it's refreshing to hear actor Kelsey Grammer warn that if you don't know where you come from, you don't know who you are. And if you don't know who you are, you can be controlled. We, the citizens, must learn the nation's founding history or we risk being manipulated. Kelsey, I agree completely. You know, we may not have been taught history the way we would have preferred to have been, but we can still learn. Get a book, read, listen. If we'll understand the sacrifices that were made so that we can have liberty and freedom, perhaps we'll choose to make some sacrifices for the generations who follow us. Folks, God's moving in the earth. Let's join him. Thank you and good night.